Hello there! Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, and today's my birthday, and so I've had a fabulous day. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I'm hoping you're going to leave a comment, because it's so good for the algorithms and I do love hearing from you. So yes, I've had a fabulous day, being spoilt rotten, and it's just so wonderful to have another birthday. Who doesn't enjoy a good birthday and a lovely lunch and, a nice celebration? And that's what I've had today. And it really is special to spend this time with you, reading you the second part of the story tonight, which I hope you're going to thoroughly enjoy. And if you hear the noise in the background, it's my pug wanting to say hello to each and every one of you. So, hello! So let's get started with tonight's story.
What exactly do you mean by that? You will find out soon enough, said the taxi driver with a warm, encouraging smile. Soon he'd parked his car on a parking spot, on the grey brick road, opposite a red brick pavement, where on the basement level of the street were shops and street vendors, but the upper stories of the buildings were residential apartments, with outside patios and wrought iron railings that overlooked the street. If you are looking for Sanchez, he live in that apartment up there, said the taxi driver, pointing to a very unassuming apartment, where a rather dirty-looking red carpet lay hanging over some wrought iron railing. My guess is if you want to find him, he won't be there. Not at this time of the day. The man, he spend most of his time out of doors. He likes the fresh air, you see. You will find him in the open courtyard, probably on his yogi mat. The man, he wears a turquoise turban on his head all the time. The courtyard is bursting with throng of people, lots and lots of people and pigeons, and many people, they gather there to watch the yogis, you see, as they meditate or perform some of their impressive nimble postures. You will see street artists, the thing like, snake charmers with their dancing cobras, stuff like that. Hard to miss. But I need to warn you that Sanchez does not see everyone. He will only see you if you requested his counsel. He give you a shake of the head. He's refusing to see you, and if that is the case, he never change his mind. So don't bother trying. Not for a second, nor even a third time. He will remember he refused you. You cannot trick a man like him. He can see our energy signatures, the aura that surrounds us. Everyone is uniquely different, you see. If he gives you 3 nods of the head, he will see you. And then you need to wait for him to finish his meditation. If he shake his head, you've wasted your time even coming here, unless you choose to speak to other gurus. But Sanchez, he is the best. He is selective about who he will see.
Lovely, thought George. He couldn't stomach the very idea of another wasted journey. He'd enjoyed enough of those to last an entire lifetime, with doctors turning him away left, right and centre. And the one who had agreed to help him had looked so dodgy, George would have not trusted him with a barge pole. It had never occurred to him that Sanchez might refuse to see him, but then it made perfect sense. Such a sought-after man was in high demand. If he were to see everyone who wanted his attention, he'd likely not have time to even draw breath, let alone meditate or perform his yoga poses that he did every day religiously. George thought about this revelation. His heart became heavy. But then he reminded himself that he had the money to pay Sanchez rather well. Out here, poverty was rife. You could see it in the begging street children, of which there were so many, far too many to count. Surely Sanchez would not refuse to see him, if he paid him very well. A great deal of money could be very persuasive, if needs must. George climbed out of his taxi, giving the taxi driver a generous tip above the fare, and was greeted with a wide flash of perfect white teeth. He walked away with a spring in his step, hoping that Sanchez might be able to help him. George ambled down the street. his white skin and western clothes sticking out among all the splashy bright colours, like a sore thumb. A couple of young street boys came rushing towards him, asking him for money. George hated begging of any kind, but he wasn't in a position to refuse these boys, so he gave them a few coins.
"Thank you, sir. This is very kind of you. Welcome to our country. Welcome to India."
"Thank you very much," said George. He watched the young boys, running towards an ice cream vendor. Wasn't it typical? No prizes for guessing what these kids intended to buy with their money. It seemed the world over, ice creams remained very popular. At the end of the long street, he came to a sprawling open area, where there were street vendors selling colourful wares, and people offering onlookers exciting entertainment of every kind. For a while George found himself rather transfixed by a snake charmer, whose cobra appeared to be dancing from its woven basket to the sound and the music of the man's flute. Then he also observed a man who seemed to be able to stick all kinds of metal implements to his body, as if in some way he was magnetic. How on earth could the man do that? George watched in abject fascination, as the crowd of people applauded, all getting terribly enthused by these masterful stunts. George could see a few yogis on their mats, sitting opposite a large fountain of white water in the square. One was caught up in a deep meditation, and appeared to be chanting a mantra. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Then there was a yogi, wearing a turquoise turban, and he was extraordinary. He was levitating above the ground with his legs crossed. "How does he do that?" came one Westerner's voice, a southern accent that George knew rather well. "It's the power of the mind," came the other voice. "It's incredible! Incredible!" the voice replied. George deduced by the turquoise turban that the man levitating himself off the ground must be Sanchez, the man that he was seeking. The taxi driver told him that Sanchez always wore a turquoise turban. That was how he'd be easily spotted. How on earth did he approach this extraordinary man? He found his brazen confidence plummeting like a stone being flung into a large body of water. George waited in the wings until Sanchez, after levitating, was now seated firmly on the ground, in a meditational stance. It was now or never, he thought, walking reluctantly towards the yogi. He was wondering how he could get this renowned yogi's attention. Maybe he should wave him a thick wad of cash surreptitiously, giving him a wink. At the last moment he decided against such actions. That was bribery of the very worst kind, and for an acclaimed, venerated spiritual man, it was unlikely to impress him very much. He moved rather presumptuously 3 feet away from the yogi mat, where Sanchez was positioned like a Buddha, with an irresolute sense of doubt hijacking all his hope, which seemed to be pulverizing every second. But there was no point in being defeatist, not just yet. There was still a glimmer of hope. Maybe the guru would agree to see him. He stood very still in a composed gait, although his legs were crumbling beneath him. The guru was very quiet, his eyes closed, his hands clasped together, as though in the midst of a tranquil prayer. George was sure he was humming some kind of mantra, but he wasn't as loud as the other guru had been. "Excuse me, Sanchez. I'm very sorry to have to interrupt you like this. My name is George. I'm from Atlanta in Georgia, the United States. I've come all the way to seek your wisdom. I have a pressing issue at stake. I cannot overcome this issue. It has crippled my life for so long. I've kept it secret from my wife. I rarely believe you are the only person that can help me from the conundrum I find myself in. Truly, I have reached the end of my tether, which is why I have travelled all the way to India to receive your wise counsel. Please, I beg you, don't turn me away." The yogi opened one brown eye, and then another. He turned around to look directly at George. He nodded 3 times, and George felt as if all his Christmases had come at once, for there was an awed response in the crowd when people saw Sanchez nodding 3 times towards George and giving him the green light. He realized in that moment it was more than an honor and a privilege to have a counsel with a spiritual guru like Sanchez, who had agreed to see him. Things were definitely looking up.
"You are very lucky, sir," said one Indian man. "Sanchez, very selective about who he chooses to see. You must wait by the stand over there, where they're making snacks. He will very soon be with you, I am most sure."
George moved over to a stand where a few plastic tables and chairs were set out. A very amenable woman came over to him, wearing a turquoise and gold sari, and a huge friendly smile upon her face. She had a red polka dot on her forehead, and presented him with a pastry-like thing that rather reminded George of a large samosa, only it wasn't. He plunged into the delicious pie. His senses were titillated with the delicious flavours. The spicy potato, chili, cumin, coriander, clove, turmeric, garlic and onion seemed to tease his taste buds. He'd have happily bolted the whole thing down as fast as he possibly could, but he chose to savour the taste, so he ate every mouthful slowly, gratefully appreciating all the flavourful piquant spices. The woman then presented him with some masala chai, which was made from water, milk, black tea, cardamom, cinnamon, ginger, and a whole lot of other spices. The tea was delicious. It made George feel rather refreshed, and invigorated his entire body, making him feel significantly cooler from the injection of hot spices in his system.
"How much do I owe you for all that?"
he asked the woman. She waved her hands.
"Your thing, the great Sanchez. It is my gift to you on his behalf. I don't want your money," she said.
George was not used to this. In a culture with so much poverty, he expected everyone to be biting his hand off for money like a hungry, snapping turtle. But this woman had incongruously refused payment. George remained stoically seated on the plastic chair, ruminating on the strange, enigmatic peculiarities and oddities the morning had unleashed upon him. Sanchez walked over to the table and sat down opposite him. He had a large, warm smile on his face. The woman who initially served him became almost flustered like a teenager with a crush, rushing around Sanchez as if he was some kind of demigod, bringing him the same piping hot snack she had presented to George only moments before. She asked George if he wanted another snack, but even though he'd gladly have sunk his teeth into one of those pastries again, he graciously refused. He didn't want to exploit the woman's kindness. If he had been paying for the thing, it would have been a different matter altogether.
"Bring him another one," said the yogi to the woman. "He's still hungry. He'd like another one. He found your pastry very delicious. He was just being polite. That's why he refused you. Am I right? Or am I right?"
George was confounded. Had this yogi read his mind? He better guard his thoughts while he spoke to this man.
Thank you very much. He is right. I would appreciate another one of your delicious pastries." "Not a problem. I'll get you one," said the lady.
To look at the yogi was unexceptional, but there was a warm light in his eyes and wisdom on his weather-beaten face that certainly got George's attention.
"Thank you very much for agreeing to see me, Sanchez," said George, as the yogi studied him through bright brown eyes that made George feel as if he was looking inside him. No one had ever looked at him this intensely before, and in truth it felt rather invasive, and he wasn't sure he enjoyed this intrusion.
"Your aura," said the yogi, shaking his head sadly. "Not good. Why are you at war with yourself? What is wrong with your leg on the right-hand side of your body? Why does it grieve you so much? The energy around that leg, black as coal. You know what I mean when I say coal." George looked at the man. Now he was flabbergasted. How could he possibly know about his leg? Without thinking, George pulled out a wad of cash from his pocket and thrust it at the yogi, his hands shaking with excitement. The yogi looked at the cash with disdain, as if in some way it was polluted. He reacted in the way that someone in America might behave if you threw a bag of dog poop at them. Why did the yogi seem almost repulsed by his money? Some of the people in India were more than a little idiosyncratic. Most of the street kids would have happily grabbed every penny he'd got. And so would the taxi driver and street vendors for that matter. But the yogi seemed to be repulsed by the money, viewing it through very different eyes, as if it had no power over him at all. And this secretly rather impressed George.
"Don't be offended," George had said. "I'm only desiring to pay you because I'm imposing on your valuable time, for I'm in much need of your sagacious advice. Where I come from in North America, we pay people lots of money for good advice and service. So I was only extending you the same courtesy. I did not mean to cause offence. Actually, at home they would demand the wage before I even got to see them, because money is very important there. You see, Sanchez, if I may be so bold as to call you that, I need to find answers to the grave predicament I find myself in, that has plagued my life for far too long."
The Indian guru had laughed at George, as if he'd made a joke. His face crinkled up into hundreds of lines, especially around the eye area, and then he smiled at George. But the smile soon melted away. His face grew solemn and much more earnest.
"That was most funny. I appreciate your humour. Your concept of time, sir, and mine are very, very different. You are not imposing on me, but your money, I do not want it. It is of no use to me."
He gave George an almost pitiful look, as if he felt very sorry for the man, who on the surface appeared to have so much. But George knew that the yogi knew the truth was very different for him, for George had so little. His life was a perennial bitter struggle. He had to face his demon every single day, and he'd give all the money in the world he possessed to get rid of it. The demon was with him when he went to bed at night, when he woke up in the morning, and even when he went to sleep. It just clung on to him with iron-like hinges, refusing to part from him. But the yogi had made mention of this monster in mentioning the right leg on his body. So this yogi knew things about him others did not. How was that even remotely possible? To know the very thing that had been ailing him for so long. Was this man psychic? Or was the inward quest to journey within oneself so incredibly powerful that it sharpened your intuition and enabled you to look into the souls of other people? He thought the latter must certainly be the case. George studied Sanchez curiously, through his keen, inquisitive eyes that skimmed over every detail of this man's body. He was unnaturally thin, with ribs sticking out of his skin obtrusively, like gnarled roots, but he looked remarkably healthy and robust for a man in his 90s. In truth, he looked more as if he was in his 50s. Indeed, George found it impossible to believe that Sanchez could actually be that old. The man's knees were heavily scuffed with white patches, probably from rubbing his knees against the sand, or even the yoga mat, you couldn't be sure. His slender feet were bare, and the turban he wore around his body had almost certainly seen better days. But the enviable aspect of this unassuming, very demure man was that every single cell of his body spilled out happiness. He could actually feel the tranquil energy and the sense of well-being that surrounded Sanchez, and his bright brown bird-like eyes were energized. George privately thought about all the illustrious events he had attended in recent years, with some of Atlanta's most affluent individuals, and compared to Sanchez, they were restless, hungry all the time, like a school of sharks cruising the ocean, looking for another tasty morsel to devour, another investment to crack, another money-making opportunity to grab their attention. But they did not exude this inner peace, this tranquility and joy. On the contrary, the more they attained, the more miserable they became, and the hungrier they got for still more and more and more. Solomon in Ecclesiasticals explained it well.
Whoever has money does not have money enough.
In other words, they go round and around in circles, wanting more and more, and feeling as if they have less. George realized in that moment that he envied this man's great peace.
"So pray tell me," said the yogi, "why have you come to see me, all the way from Atlanta in the United States of America? I see you are a successful man. You have many things, but you realize you have nothing. You are right. You do have nothing. You have come to the threshold of your self-discovery, which is the only reason why I agreed to see you. When a man realizes he has nothing, no matter what he owns, then there is hope of much spiritual enlightenment. For when we enter this world, we come here with nothing, and when we leave this world, we leave with nothing. But the pursuit of things in the West is an occupational hazard. It's a contagious disease that leaves people stunted in their joy and their spiritual development. I see you have a great obstacle in your life, keeping you from moving forward in your spiritual awakening. Would you like to tell me about it? He asked George, his steely eyes almost changing from brown to a greenish colour. George felt absolutely certain that Sanchez knew already what he was going to say, but needed to hear George articulate the words for himself and express his inhibitions in the light of the morning, as if it was the very start of his healing. George trembled ever so awkwardly. This was the moment he dreaded the most in doctors' offices, when they asked him what it was that he needed. The wary looks they'd ultimately give him. One had been rude enough to laugh in his face, as if what he was asking was absolutely preposterous. But there was such a kindness in Sanchez's face, and a gentleness in his manner, that enabled George to spill out his truth. For the first time in his life it flowed out of his mouth as smoothly as a river of confession. Ever since I was a little boy, Sanchez, I have wanted to get rid of my right leg. I've even tried to cut it off myself. My parents believed I was suicidal. I was 8 years old when I first tried to hack off my own leg with my father's axe, but not with very much success, I hasten to say. I began to chicken out as I lunged the thing into my leg. I was more afraid of the pain that I would inflict on myself, more than anything else. But boy, did I want my leg gone, more than anything else in the world. And that has not changed. My parents were absolutely mortified. They thought that their little boy had tried to kill himself. I just told them I wanted to cut off my leg. My mother did not believe me. She clandestinely believed that I was being bullied at school and wanted to put myself out of my misery. I think there would have been easier ways, don't you, to kill myself than afflict myself with so much pain. I remember my mother looked at me as if I was completely deranged. What do you want to do that for, George? God has gifted you with 2 fabulous legs. Why are you so ungrateful? You could have died if we hadn't called the ambulance in time. I had done some damage to myself, a fair amount, you see, but I hadn't hit any major arteries. But I never ever wanted to die. That was the problem. I wanted to live. I just wanted rid of my leg. My father was equally as mad as me, nonplussed by my idiosyncratic behaviour. They couldn't comprehend why I hated my right leg so much. I tried to explain it to them, but it's very difficult to explain something you don't understand yourself. Needless to say, they thought I was barking mad. My father said, "You should be ashamed of yourself, son. There are people out there who are missing a right leg, would do anything to have one back. But you want to chop yours off. Are you delusional? You'll end up being fitted with a prosthesis and not having the ability to be a normal man. Do you really want that for yourself?" I wanted to tell him that yes, I did want that for myself. I wanted rid of my right leg more than anything else in the world. But how could I make them ever understand that? My parents sent me to therapy, and the therapist told them I was not suicidal. But my parents thought that she was useless. I mean, what kind of therapist could she be if she didn't think I was suicidal? I mean, I had to be if I wanted to chop off my leg right. They hounded the school I attended, insisting that they instituted anti-bullying policies. They blamed a poor kid who put a cockroach on my cheese sandwich, which was a joke, for being the cause of all my distress. The poor boy never played any more of those tricks again on anyone, after being duly informed that a little boy had tried to kill himself because he'd put an insect on their cheese sandwich. My parents and the school were being ridiculous, and the poor boy was ostracized for being a naughty little kid pulling some funny stunts. What my parents failed to comprehend again and again is that I felt hatred towards my right leg all my life, as if it was an alien entity living on my body that wasn't welcome there. I wanted it off like a large boil. It didn't belong to me. It had no place being on me. At one point I was diagnosed by a therapist with some kind of body morphic disorder. I gather I'm not alone in this. There are other people out there much like myself, but not many. I wouldn't mind having met up with one or two of these people, to have an ally in understanding my daily struggles. Of course, I've been to doctor after doctor, begging them to remove my leg, but they refused to do so. I have found this with great regret. Then they're the backstreet doctors, of course, that have agreed to do it. Only, of course, with vast sums of money, for a procedure paid well in advance, that I'm not quite sure they're qualified to do. It reminds me of those women in the olden days secretly seeking backstreet abortions. Many of them died in the hands of charlatans. It was a red flag to me, of course. Would I survive their procedure? Because the ones that agreed to do this, I know I can't trust with my life. And the ones that refuse to do it are the very doctors I believe will give me a high-quality amputation that I know would be very, very favourable and satisfactory. You see, I want to live very much. Removing a leg is not like removing a mole. I would have done it a long time ago myself, if that were indeed the case. The long and the short is, I can't bear to live with my right leg. I wish I could remove it, but it's impossible. Some doctors think I'm a complete wacko. Why would anyone want to amputate a perfectly healthy, good leg that would render them crippled for the rest of their lives? But I don't care about any of that. But they fail to even grasp the loathing that I have for my leg. It's incongruous, I know. It's unfathomable, I know. But it is what it is. It was when I read an article about you in a paper. Very good article it was. A Westerner came to see you. A man called Prt2of3, I believe his name was. He wanted to die more than anything else in the world. You've given him his joy back. In the article you were talking about getting to the root of a problem. I thought when I read that article that you were the man I needed to seek. Your counsel is what I need. For if anyone can help me, Sanchez, it has to be you, said George obsequiously, eyeing the guru through pleading eyes that spoke of his desperation, that had brought him on this intrepid journey to India in the first place. The yogi looked at George with empathy in his soulful eyes, as if he could personally taste the man's pain. He paused for a moment and stared at George, not in a rude, obtrusive way, but as if he was studying him on a deep level, his eyes soon settling on George's right leg. Finally he spoke. You have exhibited much hatred towards your leg over your whole life. This I see on the right-hand side of your aura. It is diseased by the hatred you have directed towards it. Hatred is a powerful energy that can be perceived by your entire body. Hatred brings on disease in every form. I can tell you hate your leg very, very much. For me, looking at you, answer is simple. I have seen this before. It is? Asked George, looking astounded, for the first time in his life, wondering if he could dare to hope for a breakthrough in his life where he could live with the demon that resided on his body so offensively. Why is that? Please will you tell me, Sanchez? I'm champing at the bit to know. I'm not sure what your spiritual beliefs are, what you do or do not believe, but we are all one, and on this earth, for God to experience himself in us, we are all connected each and every one of us. Before you agreed to your incarnation, you decided you wanted to be born without your right leg, so that you would have to conquer a measure of disability. You were adamant that this is what you intended to do, but your spirit guides and the God Force persuaded you to see sense. They didn't think you were advanced enough soul to take on such an impediment, and that it would not serve your very best interests. You see, Mr. Finnegan, the soul is always evolving. That is what it is desirous to do. It does not come to earth to own hundreds of cars, houses, or money. It comes to earth to evolve. Sometimes the soul wants to take on way too much, which can be self-destructive. It's called being spiritually ambitious. Far too many souls want to evolve too fast and are eager to overcome adversity, tough challenges. Look around you at the disability you see everywhere. Those are ambitious souls who chose to come to this earth with those impediments. They navigate some tough paths that some of us would refuse to undertake. Poverty can also be an ambitious thing that someone takes on. In the natural world, it makes no sense to us at all. Why would anyone want to do that? Why would a baby come to earth to die only 6 months later? It doesn't happen by chance. Those souls planned the lessons of evolution they needed to learn. It won't make sense to you, but it makes sense to the soul. There is a collection of souls that make these decisions together, under the guidance of the Council of Elders. On the surface it may seem insane to you, but there is sanity in this madness. And the God Force wants to experience every condition, good and bad, in us. You must realize, Mr. Finnegan, that the spirit is not physical. It likes challenges far too much. It is excited about advancing and going back to Source, or God, whatever you want to call it. You were persuaded by your spirit guides to be born with 2 legs. But somewhere deep inside you, it would seem you have remembered the challenge you wanted to undertake, being born with only 1 leg. So during your life, your right leg, you believe, should not be with you, which is why you have been trying to get rid of it, as if you are adhering to your spiritual contract that was never made, but in your head it was. We all enter this life with choices made with the God Force and our spirit guides, but you remember what you agreed to do, that they persuaded you against undertaking, but you forgot that you agreed to relinquish that part of your contract. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? I'm a religious man, Mr. Sanchez, but I do agree. We are all one. The Bible tells us that, that's for sure. And if what you are saying is true, and it does sound credible, what do I do to change the way I feel about my leg? If I'm meant to live with it, how do I overcome the way I feel about it? You need to make peace with your leg. How did any war ever come to an end? With a peace settlement. It is no different with your leg. You've been waging war with it for years. You need to begin to appreciate it as a God-given gift, accept it as an intrinsic part of yourself. We need to make peace with most things in our life, do we not? If something is oppressing us, we must embrace it rather than run from it. It'll loosen its hold over us. Things only have power when we give them that power. The trouble with you Westerners, Mr. Finnegan, you think you will find peace and happiness in your material gain. If I'm richer, I will have everything. Be happy. It is a lie. It is only on the inward journey in our lives, when we look inside ourselves, that we find peace. The kingdom of God, you can call it. It is the simplicity of life, which is where we find our great abundance. Less is definitely more, he chuckled. Look at me. I have nothing, but I am rich as a king. And look at you. You have so very much, Mr. Finnegan. Lots of money, I can see. Yet, in truth, you are completely destitute. I mean, look at the eagles soaring the heavens. Imagine if they were so insecure they had to carry the weight of their food on their wings. That would be very scary. They'd never be able to fly. They'd be weighted down by so much stuff. So what do? They trust the flow of nature. They haven't got a choice. They believe each day they will find their food. You must do likewise, Mr. Finnegan, for wealth does not come from outside of you. The treasure, the kingdom, it's all inside. I have many sad men, seen so many of them in my life, just like you, Mr. Finnegan, very sad men. They wanted the ground to swallow them whole. Some of them have more money than any sense. They are buried beneath its hold, not knowing it's the very thing that is crushing their joy, for in pursuing the material gains, they are overlooking their spiritual awakening. And where there is an imbalance in our lives, there is absolutely no peace. They instinctively know something is missing in their lot, but they don't know what it is. It's what they're here for, to spiritually evolve. That's what we're all here for, Mr. Finnegan. When they do that, they find a rich reward. Envy of others will fly out of the window, and the freedom to be who you were meant to be will reign supreme and conquer all your doubts, your fears, your insecurities. My advice to you, Mr. Finnegan, is to give thanks every day for your leg, to take long walks on your legs. Then you will soon see it is better to have 2 legs than just one. You need to inwardly heal, for there is self-hatred in your heart that you have directed towards your leg. It has contaminated your aura. You need to be careful. You don't want to invite disease into your body, for in our hate, weeds and funguses choose to grow. You need to move into a peaceful part of the world where you are close to nature, away from the hustle and bustle of the big city. That would serve your best interests well. It is in nature that you can heal. That is my advice to you. Go where there are ubiquitous trees, for they are wise in souls indeed. They will help you to heal, for they can pick up the anguish of a man's soul, you know. They are the environmental mops of the landscape, cleaning away our tears. I will check up on you from time to time, Mr. Finnegan, to see how you are doing. So go well, my friend, said Sanchez, getting up, tapping him on the back. He nodded at the lady who had brought them both snacks, and she gave him a bow, unable to suppress a giggle. The Indian woman reminded George of when Americans meet a football hero or a pop star. The people in India were only in awe of their cows and the yogis. It seemed to George a little over the top. So there we are. That's the end of part 2 of our story. Isn't it fantastic, all this, problem and drama he's having over his leg? We'll see where this leads. I wonder where Bigfoot comes into this story. I hope you join me for part 3 to find out. Until next time, goodbye and good night.